Hi, so today we're going to talk about energy and life. So we learned about in chapter 3 the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs, and we're going to kind of go over that in this chapter as well. So all living things need energy to survive. This energy comes from food, and the energy in most food comes from the sun. So the ultimate source of energy, once again, is from the sun. Plants and some other types of organisms are able to use light energy from the sun to produce their own food. So examples are plants can use energy from sunlight to make their own food. Then organisms such as us, such as humans, eat these plants to get our energy. So organisms such as plants which make their own food are called autotrophs. Once again, because they automatically make their own food. That's how I think of it. Organisms such as animals that must obtain energy from the foods they consume are called heterotrophs. So these are autotrophs, and we are heterotrophs. So chemical energy and ATP, that's what this says. Energy comes in many forms, including light, heat, and electricity. Energy can be stored in chemical compounds as well, such as glucose in the food that we eat, a simple sugar. An important chemical compound that cells use to store and release energy is called adenosine triphosphate, abbreviated as ATP. So here's ATP. 3 phosphates, adenosine and 3 phosphates. So this is the molecule that organisms such as humans store energy in. So we break down food and we create molecules of ATP that the body can then use for actual energy. So ATP is used by all types of cells as their basic energy source. ATP consists of adenine, ribose, sugar, a 5-carbon sugar, and 3 phosphate groups, 1, 2, 3. The 3 phosphate groups are the key to ATP's ability to store and release energy. They store the energy in their bonds, and when you get rid of this last phosphate, when you get rid of that bond between the phosphate, it releases the energy. So ADP has 2 phosphate groups instead of 3. That's why it's called diphosphate instead of triphosphate. A cell can store small amounts of energy by adding a phosphate group to ADP. So we can think of ADP kind of as a partially charged battery. If we add a phosphate, that fully charges the battery. Now we've got a fully charged battery, okay? And that battery is going to store that energy until it's needed. So ADP is a partially charged battery, ATP is a fully charged battery. So releasing the energy from this battery, all it takes is breaking the chemical bond between the 2nd and 3rd phosphates right here. This will release the energy from the ATP molecule. Boom, energy. Now we're back to ADP. We've used most of the energy of the battery at this point once we go back to ADP. The energy from ATP is needed for many cellular activities, including active transport, which we talked about in chapter 7, across cell membranes, protein synthesis, and muscle contraction. So diffusion is passive transport. Remember, it requires no energy. But if we want to move molecules against a concentration difference, we need this ATP molecule. We need the energy in order to do that. Another thing is making proteins. ATP is required in this process. So loading the amino acid to the tRNA required the most energy ATP in the entire process. So ATP is needed to make proteins, and also ATP is used in muscle contraction. So these myosin heads hydrolyze ATP before reoriented and energized. Myosin heads bind to actin, forming cross bridges, and myosin heads rotate towards the center of the sarcomere. As myosin heads bind ATP, the cross bridge detach from the actin, and so on and so forth. So this is a really complicated version of a muscle contraction, but as you can see, ATP is needed in this reaction. So ATP's characteristics make it exceptionally useful as the basic energy source of all cells. So using biochemical energy, most cells only have a small amount of ATP because it's not really a good way to store large amounts of energy. So cells can regenerate ATP relatively quickly from ADP as needed by using the energy in foods like glucose. So we've got tons of ADP molecules in our body, and we can add that extra phosphate to make ATP by getting the energy from the foods like glucose. Okay? So all the food that we eat can be used to restore ATP molecules. And that is all for today about energy and life. Thanks for watching.